there have been moments in my career where I've struggled deeply with stress and anxiety, where I knew I wasn't coping and put more stress and pressure on myself as a result, because I sort of figured, well, just push on through, it'll be okay. And it wasn't.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Finding Equilibrium show. I'm delighted to be here, delighted that you're here, and delighted that my guest today is Steven Worrall. Now, Steven is the MD of Microsoft here in Australia and across New Zealand, and he's also the chair of the Corporate Mental Health Alliance, which is a super exciting initiative, and I'm very keen to find out more about that. So, Steven, welcome. How are you today?
I'm very well, Lawrence. It's great to be here with you.
Yes, awesome to have you. And where are you based? You're in Sydney as well?
Based in Sydney. I'm actually in the office today, which is an exciting experience. I haven't had that much recently.
I was going to say, it looks a bit more kind of formal than last time that I saw you. So MD of Microsoft, that's a big job. And I'm very curious to start with is just to understand your journey to this point. So how did it begin? How did you become, have such an influential and important role?
That's a big question over a long period of time. But if I keep it short, Lawrence, I think I've been in the industry a long time. And so I joined IBM 30 years ago, in fact, as a graduate, and have been in the tech space and did lots of great things with IBM for many years. Was fortunate enough to join Microsoft about 7 years ago and became MD 5 years ago. Look, I think I'm very fortunate to have joined the industry, and also at this time, Lawrence, because technology is having such a deep impact on everything around us. And I feel very privileged to be at Microsoft right now because it's a great company and we've got so many technologies and assets that can play a really important role across our community. So it's a fantastic position, as you say, and I'm very lucky to have it.
Yes, no, it's wonderful. So maybe that's a good place to start, because technology and well-being, I'm really interested in. It's one of those kind of double-edged swords, isn't it, really? Because like digital technology, the way it's changed and has really touched every aspect of our lives. And you can see the real positives, but there's also a more challenging side. And I'd love your perspective on how do we use technology to enhance well-being within families, within communities, within workplaces?
Well, I think the premise of the question is key, isn't it, Lawrence? Because the reality is technology is just a tool. When you boil it down at the simplest level, it is an enabler, it is a tool. And like many tools, it can be used to do things that are positive and constructive or not. It can be destructive, or it can have unintended consequences. And there's a lot of conversation on that topic in the media that we all read, and many implications for that broad statement. Social media might be a good example. It's a wonderful tool that connects us all with our friends and networks around the country and around the community and around the world. And yet we also know there are implications, and we're seeing those show up in many cases in the younger cohort in terms of some of the mental health implications that the use of social media can have. And so I think the starting point, Lawrence, is that it's just a tool, and we just need to be aware of the implications of the use of that tool. And I think as a result then, but to the second part of your question, I think there's a massive role that technology can play in regards to well-being and mental health more broadly. And, we here at Microsoft and many others across the industry, and for that matter, in many other industries, are thinking deeply about the use of technology and how we can do just that. And we can talk about some of the specific examples if you're interested, but it's a big issue for us, as you might imagine, given the role that Microsoft plays and the use of our technologies that obviously go across so many parts of our community and all across the world.
I am interested in some of the specifics, and maybe given your role at Microsoft, how many employees do you have in Microsoft Australia and New Zealand? Like, how many people are working for the organization?
It's about 2,500 in total, and around the world, as you might imagine, about 140 to 150,000 Microsofties. And so we're obviously a tech firm deep in the technology, but we're also, just like every other company, every other community, using technology on a day-to-day basis. And so we've learned so much over the last 2 years, Lawrence, in terms of how technology can help us, but also what are the implications from a mental health point of view. And some of the practical examples that we've been working on are how we are going to continue to and are investing in the Teams platform, which is the digital experience that we create for ourselves and for our customers, by inserting, for argument's sake, more deliberate breaks in the day. And this sounds like a very simple example, and it is, but it highlights what's been the experience for so many people over the last 2 years through the pandemic, where those who are fortunate enough to be able to work remotely and in many cases are just connecting in meetings, start their day by a meeting and then go through, could be 12, could be 14, could be longer hours during the day of meeting after meeting after meeting. And it's been widely reported the fatigue that creates for those that are participating in those meetings. And so one of the developments in our platform, we call it Viva, is to insert deliberate commute times or deliberate breaks that might force their way into your diary as by design, to ensure that there's a mental break and just a break during the day for each of us to what might have otherwise been a commute. It might be to engage in some mindfulness, and we have a collaboration with Headspace, who provide guided meditations that then insert themselves into your diary as one example. Or it could be a reminder to read something of particular interest, or it might physically be to get up and take a pet for a walk. And so simple examples like that we're finding becoming increasingly important, so that the increasingly digital experience we have is one that we are directing, and we're not being subject to just meeting after meeting.
How interesting. So like the actual technology itself almost is like a kind of almost like a mentor who's kind of observing your behavior and saying enough is enough. Is that what you're saying? Or
well, it's by design. So, you or I, if it was us, we'd look at our diary and say, look, tomorrow, for argument's sake, I've got a big day, so I want to make sure I take a break here, here, and here. Carve that. And you could do that simply by just putting a meeting in there for yourself, of course. But the platform we're evolving provides some prompts that, at your direction, might then suggest, well, look, you've had a certain number of hours without a break, or over the next week, we can see that you've got a very intense week. Why don't you think about a mindfulness session, or why don't you think about a simple break where you might read that journal that you've indicated that you're interested in. So again, it's a tool, and so I think what we're building into the platform is the capability to make these suggestions more present, so that we don't, in a non-mindful way, simply find ourselves engaging in meeting after meeting over 12 or 14 hour day, which many people report. They report rolling out of bed, getting onto a meeting, and then 12 hours later they're disconnecting. And it might feel good at the time because you're being productive and you're engaged in the work, which is wonderful. But we know over time that's not healthy. And so I think we think about all of those issues very deeply.
No, I really like that. So just moving on and talking now a little bit about mental health, because I know this is an area that's close to your own heart, and I'm interested in why why it is so important for you, as a CEO of a large organization. That's part of the question, and then the other part of the question is, how do you balance the needs of the mental health needs of the employees, if you like, with the fact that businesses need to grow, and the markets are dynamic and challenging, and it's always that challenge. And I'm very curious in your perspective on that.
I think initially, from a personal point of view, my story is like many others, if not all others. We all have challenges in our life. My story, very particularly. There have been moments in my career where I've struggled deeply with stress and anxiety, and for many years thought that's just how it is, and you just sort of push on. But there was a moment in the last 5 years where my father passed away, and that created massive stress and anxiety for myself and for my family, as those events tend to do. And I remember thinking at the time that the confluence of factors, the pressure at work. I just started at Microsoft. In fact, it was probably 6 years ago, so just after I joined. the desire to perform in a new environment. My father needing my attention and support at that time as he went through a battle with cancer. And then, my role as a father, and I have 3 children and a wife. There was moments there, Lawrence, where I knew I wasn't coping and put more stress and pressure on myself as a result, because I sort of figured, well, just push on through, it'll be okay. And it wasn't. And so, that's a personal reflection, but everyone has a story or 10 like that, because we've all got parents, we've all got brothers and sisters, we're all parents, and not to mention the pandemic over the last 2 years. So this is a very natural, human issue that we all deal with. And if I then go to the second part of the question, I think what that experience has helped me to more deeply appreciate is, my performance at work was impacted substantially. Everyone around me knew, but they didn't know what the cause was. And I wasn't mature enough to open up and talk about it at work, because I felt that's not something I should bring to work, and it's a personal issue anyway. And what I've come to realize, Lawrence, and it's everyone gets to make this decision. I think that's important. But what you want to create as an employer is a sense of psychological safety. And what does that mean? That means that, we talk about bring your authentic self to work. Well, it's a bit hard to do that if you don't feel safe, if you don't, whether you are female in a male-dominated industry, or whether you are transgender, whether you have some form of short or long-term disability, if you're in a minority and you're in a non-psychologically safe environment, it's very hard to bring your full self to work. And yet we talk about it as employers all the time. We want you to, be yourself. Well, you need a precondition of psychological safety. And, we're still learning what that means, because as an employer, we've got a long way to go. But that's the genesis of the Corporate Mental Health Alliance, because not surprisingly, when, I was thinking some of these issues through, it didn't take long in talking to clients and partners and others to realize that we're all grappling with these same issues, and we can all learn from each other, because this isn't about, one company being better than another. This is about us thinking about the workplace as an important environment. 13 million Australians go to work every day. And what would it look like if we created more psychologically safe workplaces more often? It'd look pretty good, I think, for our community. And so that's what the Alliance has been formed to help develop.
That's amazing. So tell me a little bit more about the Alliance. It's an alliance of corporations. So who else is part of the Alliance?
The Alliance is about 20 member organisations. We represent about 450,000 working Australians, Commonwealth Bank of Australia, Coles, Woolworths, many of the largest legal firms, Pricewaterhouse, KPMG, Deloitte, and several other organisations. Bunnings are in there, in with us as well. And so it's a representative group of Australian businesses across many industries, not all, and we're obviously looking to continue to develop the membership so that it does represent every sector of the economy. But I think, Lawrence, one of the really interesting moments came not long after we launched, when we had a meeting with Coles and Woolworths in the room. And these are two organisations, for lots of really good reasons, don't collaborate on many things. They're direct competitors, and by relation, they compete in many, many areas. But as they acknowledged during the conversation, this is one of the few things, if the only things, that they work together, because it's not about any one company. When we look at the prevalence of mental health and the issues in our society, especially for our younger generation coming through, we look at suicidality at the sort of extreme end of the spectrum. We all have to do more, Lawrence. We've got to raise the bar for everyone. And the workplace, as I've said, is a really important place for us to bring a more comfortable or more orderly conversation about the importance of mental health, and to normalise it so that there's no stigma attached to anyone saying they may have a mental health challenge. That we make it as simple as it might be if I walk in with a sling on my arm and say I had an accident on the weekend and I've got a sore arm. We would ask about it and we would move along and we'd wish the person well and we would help them. That would be the end of that discussion. But in the mental health space, I don't know that we're there yet, right? I'm sure we're not. It's not as normalized, and there is stigma attached still. And I think there's much that we can do as a workforce and as a community to help normalize that conversation.
Now, I love that. And the alliance itself, so in terms of purpose, so I understand you've got 20 organizations and others hopefully coming together to really, and they're signing up to creating, a better work environment that impacts so many lives. So I get that. And psychological safety is so important. And, we cover that a lot through our summits around the world. I think it's practically, isn't it? It's how you actually see it. So does the alliance, are they creating tools that everyone can use and share? Is that one of the outcomes of the alliance?
Yeah, very much so. And I think at the top level, there are two primary elements to what we're hoping to achieve. One is to share credible practice, and that is all of us are doing things that are working. None of us suggest that it's best practice or that we're there yet. And at the first level, Lawrence, it's all about what do we share? What are we doing in each other's organizations that might work in others? And guess what? There's so much that great companies like CBA, like Woolworths and Coles and others are doing, the Bunnings are doing, to help create psychological safety at their workplaces that we can all learn from. So that'd be the first thought. The second thought is to be expert guided but business led. And part of the alliance is a group of experts in the space. Lucy Brogden, the chair of the National Mental Health Commission, Professor Ian Hickey, Sam Harvey from Black Dog, Georgie Harmon from Beyond Blue, leaders in the space who are expert in all aspects of mental health, coming together with us to guide us and to provide input that we can then use in designing then the future of psychological safety in the workplace. And so having launched, we formed the alliance before the pandemic. We launched during the pandemic, and fair to say, Lawrence, we've got a very long way to go. But yes, ultimately, you'll see us produce research, evidence-based in terms of the efficacy of approaches that members are using, tools and guidelines that we can then offer. And perhaps the last thing, and maybe it's the most important, is that this is not a typical membership organisation. We're not set up to serve members only. We feel very passionate about the role that this collective can play in sharing everything that we learn with any employer in the country. And that's something we're really excited about, because we do think a lot of what we will share and learn will be applicable to organisations large and small across the country.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's interesting when I look across all of, because we've done now, I think, 12 summits across the world, and it covers all of the different touch points that impact wellbeing and mental health. And one of the big ones, common theme, has been leadership and management. And I'd love your thoughts on how do we evolve the kind of leadership, because a lot of this is mindset, and given what's happened over the last 18 months, and this is my own personal view, but it feels that pre-pandemic mental health was a big trend. Thanks to pandemic, everyone realizes that we've all got mental health, and there's all things that we can do to prevent it becoming a mental crisis or a mental illness. So I think that's been one of the positive takeaways from this. But it requires a lot of change in behavior, and we've all been forced to change. Now we're all working at home, and hybrid working, hybrid leading, hybrid management. That's not necessarily easy if we haven't been trained. I'd love your thoughts on how you're supporting the leaders and the managers at Microsoft, for example, to get the balance right between being task focused, getting the job done, versus supporting the mental health of their employees, which naturally will get the job done as well. But sometimes we're more focused on, the short-term aims as opposed to the wider impact it can have on people. And particularly how we do that in an environment where workplace is not necessarily the fact that we're all sitting together in the same room, as was more common, just a couple of years ago now.
It's such a fascinating question, Lawrence, and you've touched on so many threads there that I find so interesting. The dynamic of the last couple of years with the pandemic, how we felt about this topic before the pandemic, now how we feel, generational divides, because the research tells us that the younger cohort coming into the workforce, Gen Z, the millennials, are feeling the pressures and the issues associated with the pandemic, and very specifically how it translates into the workforce more so than other cohorts, although the other cohorts very, very much experiencing as well. But if I come to the central part of your question, I think it is about leadership, and it's about Brian Marion, who is the chief executive of the Positive Group, which is an organisation in the UK that's set up to educate and help business leaders and others to raise the bar and raise their level of competence in terms of dealing with mental health in the workforce. It talks about psychologically informed leaders, and it's a simple expression or a simple term that acknowledges without psychologically informed leaders, it's very difficult then to create the conditions for psychological safety. And so what does it mean to be psychologically informed? I mean, at its heart, it is that as employers, there's no organisation that intends to do harm physically to an employee when they come to the workforce. In fact, just about every organisation, and certainly those involved in heavy industries, have very deliberate and discrete policies about safety. You'll often have safety briefings at the start of any meeting with organisations that are involved in heavy engineering or mining, for argument's sake, as one example. And the corollary here is, how do we create in workplaces where that awareness of psychological safety and the importance of it is as present as it is in terms of that physical aspect? And that's an easy thing to say and hard to do. And like most things that involve change, leaders have to go first. They have to show the way, and they have to have an awareness of what needs to occur. Not that they need all the answers, because none of us do. But I think that you start with that general level of curiosity and desire, recognition of the issue, and then you move from there. And again, that's where the alliance comes in, I think, Lawrence, because none of us profess to have the answers or to feel like we've got this, the recipe sorted. But we do know if we share with each other, we can raise the confidence level of us as a collective, and in so doing, aspire to create more psychologically safe workplaces in future.
No, I love that and completely agree. So just moving on now, I'm curious in terms of how do we track? Because one of the issues, my background's marketing, and growing up in the world that I did, digital marketing became the norm, and data and analytics became such an important tool to help us understand the impact of what we were doing. When you look at mental health and the wellbeing initiatives, it is like a bottomless pit in terms of like the things that we can do, and we're training leaders, but there are lots of other tools and lots of other platforms and resources that companies are using. How do you, at Microsoft or more generally, I'm interested in your view, how do we track and measure the impact of those initiatives so that we can create business cases to be able to support the ongoing and sustainable investment in those things? Because like everything business, it is getting the balance between the business needs and the individual's needs. The shareholders, there's a lot of different stakeholders involved here, and if it's too far one way, then it gets out of balance. And what we talk about all the time is finding equilibrium, and in the business it feels at times it can go too far one way, and then that has an impact. And then if it goes too far the other way, then we become, not competitive and some of those things. But measurement data, I feel, and I'm happy to be challenged on this, but I feel that we need those numbers to be able to really make well-being a strategic priority, which is our objective and our goal. But it can't be a strategic priority if there's no way of measuring and tracking it and understanding. So how do you do that at Microsoft currently? And, any thoughts in terms of what the future could look like regarding this area?
This is the heart of the issue here right now, Lawrence, and how businesses, there's no business that I engage with that doesn't have an appreciation for the importance of psychological safety, or how to create the conditions to support mental health within the workforce. But there are a wide array of, different approaches that get used, largely because of this issue. That is, too much of what we're doing today in the business community isn't supported by evidence and isn't based on a deep analytical approach. Now, the reason that's the case is it's not always simple to do. And what we've seen in the past, and Lucy Brogden says this best when she talks about the fact that mental health and supporting mental health in the workplace isn't about yoga and fruit bowls. and referring to the fact that a lot of what has been done in the workplace over the last several years, probably a decade or longer, has felt good for leaders and perhaps for teams involved, but hasn't been supported by the evidence that has really addressed the underlying issues. Because, for example, if you've got a toxic culture, or if the work design, the amount of work you're actually being asked to perform is creating the stress and anxiety, then no number of yoga sessions or fruit bowls are going to help. And so, again, your question is spot on. And here at Microsoft, like many of our alliance members and many other companies for that matter, we spend a lot of time measuring and seeking feedback from our teams in regards to what's working and what's not. One of the programs that we've used here at Microsoft very successfully is called Real Mates, which is a program that a external partner has helped us to implement, where we train our teams on the sorts of protocols and conversations and the approaches they might have in working with a colleague, and they become certified as a real mate. And in our company, anyone who wants to have a conversation, a confidential conversation about something in their professional life or their personal life that's impacting their mental health, they can do that through those engagements. And obviously, in a anonymized way, we then solicit feedback as to the impact of those conversations, the quality of the training that the real mate has been through, and whether that helped to translate to a quantifiable change in how that individual was feeling about the issue. We obviously conduct pulse surveys. We have an annual survey that looks at the sort of macro trends, and we then measure in a similar way many of the other programs we have, not all, but many of the other programs that we have, to then get a sense of impact and return on investment. And as you said, it's so vital to do that, because we have to go beyond the conversation of, as I say, these being nice to have or they feel good, to that hard and fast measures of impact and productivity, because that's where we start to break through this concept that psychological safety is somehow less important than physical safety.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I guess as we move into this next phase where people talk about the Great Resignation and some of those terms, it's becoming even more important to create psychologically safe environments to attract the right employers and become an employer of choice. And I'd love your perspective on terms of how Microsoft and some of the initiatives you've touched on. Some I like. Was that Real Mates, REAL Mates? Yeah, I love that. That's such a great initiative. But anything else that you're doing to support the well-being of your people and create a positive culture and to attract people, improve productivity, all the things that are very hard metrics and are obviously the result of multiple things, not just things. But what are some of the other things that you're doing at Microsoft?
We implemented, this is last year's, a wellbeing days, where we said to the team, everyone has 3 wellbeing days. And a wellbeing day simply means it's a day you can choose. You take it when you want it, but you can choose to use to invest in your well-being. And that typically might be to go and deal with challenges with the family. It might simply be to take a break, to take a break with family or friends. Given lockdowns, that obviously was difficult. Or it might have simply been the permission just to disconnect from your day-to-day role and not turn up to those 12 hours of meetings that you might otherwise have had. So that has been received really well. That flexibility to just pick and choose. I just feel like I need a day where I don't feel like I'm at my best and I just need a break. So that's one thing. We had longer than that. Then we had a pandemic leave, and this was targeted largely at those in our team who had children at school, because everyone has had it tough through the pandemic, but perhaps no one tougher than those with young kids or school-aged children, especially where you've got both parents or partners perhaps working from home, trying then to also homeschool children. It's almost impossible, if not impossible. And so we gave 12 weeks of pandemic leave, school leave, for parents to, again, at their discretion, working with their manager to then decide, look, I need to take the next couple of weeks off, up to 3 months, to address those challenges at home. We're very fortunate to be able to offer those sorts of benefits, and I know not every company can. But I think at the heart of it, Lawrence, was a realization that what you wanted to do is to just address the flexibility issue. And I think this is the key thread. And it comes back to that Great Resignation comment you made. the feedback we're seeing from the US, from the LinkedIn surveys that we have seen and the research that we've done across about 30,000 people in different markets around the world at Microsoft and outside Microsoft, is that coming out of this time, people are looking for flexibility as the number one job attribute. And I think this is a massive issue for every employer to think deeply about, because I think we've challenged the normal relationship, or the former relationship we've all had with work. I needed to live in a city and I needed to go through an hour or two commute. I needed to be in the office 9 to 5 for those working in an office. And I think we've proven to ourselves none of that really is essential. People can work from different locations. We can be more flexible. We can think about people living in regional centres and not having to pay exorbitant prices living in the city. And they're not all conforming to a commute where everyone is jamming the roads at the same time. And we can then provide more flexibility for people to look after the kids and have that more integrated family life that we all aspire to. And so the leave options that we've put in place, I think, have been really helpful. But ultimately, for every organisation, thinking about flexibility is the key. One other quick thought that's been really impactful at Microsoft has been creating employee resource groups where we look across the company and we just ask the teams, what's important to you? And one of the groups that was formed last year was the families at Microsoft ERG, the specific implications for those managing families or with families at work, coming together to talk about those challenges. And we had a clinical psychologist join one of those sessions to talk about the pressures and the strains. And there's massive impact, I think, Lawrence, that any company can get by empowering your team, asking them what's on their mind, what's really important, picking up the key threads, and then empowering them to have that time together to talk those issues through and supporting the outcomes that might come up from those conversations.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it reminds me when I used to run a big wellbeing program in a corporate, the Relics group, when I was in London. And after all of these initiatives, the one big thing that came through was that it helped the employee feel that the company actually cared about them. And that's ultimately what we want. We want to feel that where we're working, they do actually care about us as individuals and our well-being. So isn't
that the key though? And this goes to the heart of the conversation. It's as Immanuel Kant would have said and did say hundreds of years ago, it's about treating people as an end in themselves, not a means to an end. And again, as simple as that statement is, it becomes very clear inside organizations, large or small, tech firm or not, whether the leadership truly believe in investing in and creating an environment where people can be at their best. And that's what I think we want to continue to encourage for every organization, because we've all got a very long way to go. We can all improve.
Absolutely, and always will. You continue, but I think ultimately, if you get the balance right between caring about the people and caring about the business, and it can be a difficult balance, but it's definitely possible. And there are loads of great examples, lots of evidence to actually support that. So last question. Given your position and your responsibility, everyone's problem is your problem as a managing director. 2,500 people. So what do you do personally to support your equilibrium, your own balance every day and your own well-being? You shared with us that you had, some moments in the past, but I'd love to know how you cope, how you actually support yourself and role model of the behaviors ultimately that you want to see across the organization.
Well, look, there's a combination of approaches, Lawrence, and I'm as imperfect as anyone. And so perhaps the most important thing is a willingness to take feedback and be open to A, the realization that I'm going to get things wrong, and B, that I can learn and be better by engaging and getting feedback. So I talk to my team about where I'm showing up well and ask them to tell me, more importantly, where I'm not, because I think I am experiencing the same stresses and anxieties that anyone would have felt through this time, and just realizing that every one of us none of us are perfect. Every one of us is in this together, and that by working together we can be stronger. Sort of a starting point. But of course, on top of that, very deliberate approach to physical health and mental health together. I was on a session with Liz Broderick recently. Liz is our former sexual harassment commissioner here, sexual discrimination commissioner in Australia, and more recently, over the last 10 years, has been the founder and driver behind the Champions of Change. And she talked about, to be at your best, and especially as leaders, we've got to look after ourselves. And so physical health, exercising, trying to eat well, trying to get sleep, that's a learning I had just a few years ago about the importance of sleep and the role that it plays in helping us to recover, to process, and then to be ready to engage again. I prioritize that as much as I can to make sure I get enough sleep. And then, of course, from a mental health point of view, I read a lot. Lawrence, I always enjoy conversations with leaders like yourself because I always learn through those conversations. But there are some wonderful books, and there's a wealth of information on how we can direct our attention and how we can frame the meaning that we apply to the situations we're in. Because it's been my experience over many years that two people looking at one situation can come up with wildly different conclusions. And that's really interesting.
So true. It is.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? You sort of think, why is it that some people, I was talking to Ian Robson, who's the CEO of Rowing Australia, about how amazingly well the rowing team performed in the Olympics and the Paralympians as well, of course. Mm. You've got these amazing athletes who haven't competed internationally and then turned up in Tokyo and won gold, our two quads. And you think, how is it that they were able to do that? And there's so much I get from talking to people like Ian or reading a book about similar performances by either sports people or business people. There's so much out there that can help us to think deeply about our mindset and our belief system. And for me, those are really important things to help keep my equilibrium, which is a day-by-day proposition.
No, absolutely. I mean, what you touch on mindset, it really underpins everything, doesn't it? I mean, it's the foundation of everything. But Steven, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I know you're super busy. I really appreciate your time. And I'd love to acknowledge you for the amazing work you're doing. When I listen to you speak, what I hear is a real openness. And I think that's ultimately the foundation of well-being. If we can be open to feedback and open to other people's ideas, then that's got to be a healthy start. So thank you so much for your time. Where can people find out more about your work? Clearly you're on LinkedIn, but anywhere else that you'd like to direct people to?
Well, the Corporate Mental Health Alliance of Australia has a website, and so if anyone's interested in more information, please go there. There's a wealth of info there, and always keen to engage and learn from all across the Australian network in terms of working together to create more psychologically safe workplaces for everyone. So, Lawrence, thank you for all that you do. It's great to connect with you today.
Thank you so much, and thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.